Welcome back to the Free Mouse MC YouTube channel, and today is a bit of a different video because we're going to talk about consumption, overconsumption, and in quotation marks the concept of hard work and how sensible the whole thing is. These topics were lingering around in my head, so I had to make a video on it. I usually make videos on motorcycles, and I tried fittingly to push out the most fitting bike for that, an old super sport that I spent very little money on. However, that is my dream bike. With me usually making videos on motorcycles, I so often see that so many people basically are already trained in their consumption habits to just spend money. The videos that click the most on my channel are videos on new bikes. It's the videos that get the most engagement, and I really often try to show things that are not just that because I want to give the most value to people. I show things from the used market that can really give people quite a lot for their buck. However, these things never perform that well and people are not that interested. And also the videos that I make on like genuine experiences while traveling and while working on motorcycles and all these kind of things often pale in comparison in attention they get. Also, outside of being a content creator, I worked in marketing for some time, and it's a very similar story. And at the same time, I'm so often confronted with overconsumption to a point that I get a headache from it. Walking through the city, there's so many stores, so many advertising signs, so many like little pieces of garbage at like Urban Outfitters and TK Maxx and malls, and to the point that when I walk through the city because I just need to get something, I get home tired, drained, and with a headache because I'm not interested in buying any of these things. However, they're constantly just pushing and pushing onto me. And in a way, I can't be the only one who's having this experience. And really often it feels so weird because buying things and spending money on things is tied to having money for them. And it feels so weird because all these opportunities to spend money come at the same time when the cost of the most essential things like food, rent, and transportation are just going through the roof and becoming more and more unaffordable for people, which makes it often feel like walking through a cruel joke. And I feel really often we crave all these things to buy, not because we need them, but because out of a sense of self-value or the joy that we get from the high of buying them and then having them for the first few moments. And it's crazy to see that in many ways people then fall for this, from Stanley Cups to expensive forms of transportation, of cars that cost 30 to 80 grand and more. And in a time where people basically almost have no money, I had people around me finance them for insane amounts of months. And it's wild to see, and I think it's really important to point out that things don't have to be that way. For example, here with the bike that I have standing right next to me, I got this one used and for like $900 because it was my dream bike, and then built it together at home and repaired it and had the whole experience of getting it running, which was a beautiful experience in its own. And after now talking about a more value-focused way of buying things, we need to talk about something else when it comes to consumption, and that is that it's a really big marker for who we are as a person. And a lot of people judge on that, and they judge on that very heavily and mostly from the perspective of money, to a point that really often it feels like money has turned to God in society. Like, I have purchased myself a motorcycle helmet for 250 euros after having a cheaper helmet for a really long time, which both are fine, but I wanted to treat myself. And everywhere I go, this helmet gets pointed out for being cheap. People constantly are like, "Ooh, it's only 250 euros." Where I'm like, what the fuck? 250 euros is a lot of money and also does the same thing. It looks nice. What's going on? And this is happening with so many things. I have this with my car as well. And that when like not actually earning a lot of money, and then there are sometimes situations where I get hired as a videographer, because that's something I do next to what I do, and then basically the person who hires me makes fun of my car, where I'm like, then pay me more, then fucking pay me more. And that becomes such a weird dynamic because we live in a time where the essentials like housing turned away from being something that people need to live to an investment object that gets more expensive, more crazier, to a degree where people my age are completely out of the perspective of owning a home. And that has so many weird things that come with it, like things like having children feel like they're completely out of the reality. And then keeping up with these consumption demands that you're supposed to follow up, as in buying all the nice stuff and then still doing the traditional way, doesn't work anymore. And that then always gets responded with, you just need to work hard. You just need to work hard, you need to hustle and all these kind of things. And these get like told from such an early age on, and it feels like such a big amount of bullshit. And also then when working to survive, doing things to make money, to pay the bills, these topics and really often neoliberal ways of thinking come up in such annoying ways. I remember I worked a job as a social media manager at a company, managing basically their Instagram posts and so on. And I was making more than my colleagues, but I wasn't making much. I was making like 15 euros an hour, which is now minimum wage in my home country. And I remember my boss coming into the break room being like, everyone can do it in Germany. Everyone can make it. There's no one who's socially at a disadvantage so big that they can't become a billionaire. Where I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what are we doing? And these situations happen so regularly. I remember at the same job, we had improvement of life briefing of like what the employees want, and we talked about work-life balance. And our boss refused to write down work-life balance on the sheet. And and these things happen all the time in a work context, and we need to be okay with them. As in, no one can say, this is fucked up, this is bad, this shouldn't be normal, because that will cost you your job in many cases. And me now recording this video talking about these things is actually something that will potentially hurt my bottom line and will put job opportunities for me at risk in my industry. However, it often fills me with so much anger. And with this necessity to work, it becomes such a kicking down process to people who have less money. I partially also have experience being self-employed, and the negotiating process for pay becomes so fucking hard in today's society. Nothing is off the table. Negotiating after a done deal, trying to play chicken with a lawsuit, basically doing every kind of crooked move, and really often asking for rates that are so much below the living level. And this is an experience that so many people are sharing, that is happening for so many people. And in many ways, it is really frustrating. And then seeing these things and perceiving these things while looking into politics, and here in Germany, our right now chancellor is talking about gutting the social state in many ways, getting rid of the 40-hour work week, and all these kind of things. And this starts feeling in many ways like living in a George Orwell novel, and it's just messed up in so many ways. And this last week in many ways has been a bit the cracking point for me, because like working really hard, working late into the evening, and then walking past homeless people. I last week saw a homeless person cuddling their teddy, and fuck man, that kind of was not good for me. And we just kick down onto people who have less than us. Like, I walked this morning through the train station, and there are always these like announcements of like, oh, they're organized beggar groups that just want to take your money. Where I'm like, what the fuck is that? They're people begging who are homeless. They're not organized beggar groups. And even if people would do that, I'm guessing that their financial situation must be so precarious that they're in a way forced to do that. There's no, oh yeah, I'm buying myself the next Porsche for my begging money. And this is something like, this is played over the speakers at my local train station, which feels dystopian. Well, basically, year over year, we see more homeless people there. And in many ways, this dynamic is so bad, not just looking at the obvious, but it makes not having enough money to live and being under financial stress a moral failure. And this is also how it's treated in the majority of positions of society, and that is really, really wrong and messed up, especially in a time where the majority of people that kind of perceive themselves as middle class, which is a weird thing to begin with, are moving in a bracket of society where they can't afford the things that are associated with that, basically all being victim of the moral failure of being poor. And you encounter that in day-to-day life in so many ways in society, in a normal job, also in self-employment, where really often when you negotiate for money, it's the weird oxymoron of we can't pay you more, our budgets are so small, and then basically like crying about all that kind of stuff really hard. And then at the same time, this is followed up with work harder. And this is kind of where the topic consumption ties into the topic of hard work. And hard work is such a weird phrase to begin with, because it's so overused at this point. Every time I hear someone talk about work and doing it very much, I hear them talking in the voice of Kim Kardashian because of that one clip where she says that people don't want to work anymore.
It seems like nobody wants to work these days.
That's so true.
And this gets so tiring. Like, let's look at it from the perspective of working for a company. Like, it's not just clocking in and doing your stuff. I think that would be perfectly fine. We all gotta make a living somehow. However, now we kind of went to a point where we all have to love it. Like, there's so much like weaponized therapy and religious bullshit talk ever since the 2000s that every job like thing that you can apply for sounds basically like, I don't know, a flyer from Scientology or some shit. And you can't just like do middle management. No, you have to really burn for it. You have to be really passionate, put in the overtime and all that kind of stuff. And really often for what? To buy all the nice things? I guess that's still somewhat alright, but really often the framing now changes in a work context, in my experience, to basically buy the basic needs that you have to deserve a living. And that becomes so frustrating, or to reach the next level in a career. The weird thing about careers is, though, it always feels like at the next level there's going to be a bit more money, a bit more comfort, a bit more calmness, and more time for actually living. However, that never comes, and I think it's important to realize that early, to not waste too much energy of life, too many years of life on these kind of things, because the way this is going, it feels really often really dystopian and weird and bad and like stuff out of a sci-fi movie, especially if you look at basically how legislation is changing in the majority of countries to be more and more to the disadvantage of people that actually work. And I think the things that you can do against it in your personal life is like prioritize the people that are important around you, prioritize your friends and like your partner, and spend more time with them, because that ends up being a lot more valuable. And I think it's important to also realize that a lot of value is in community. Recently in my city, a lot of graffiti tags started showing up where people started spraying on the walls, you deserve community, you deserve calm, and you deserve healing. They've been, and loads of other things, they've been showing up all over my hometown. And in many ways, these things are true. However, like, trying to build a community and contacts with other people is really hard. I've been trying this myself because I've been realizing these things for myself. And it's so tough to connect with friends if everyone is just working all the time. Really often at my old job, I never knew when I would get overtime, so half of my evenings was ruined. I never was able to schedule anything with friends, and a lot of people are in that situation, so it's really tough to do anything. And at the weekend, everyone is just exhausted, which results in, for example, I here locally in my hometown, outside of like the YouTube stuff that I do, want to drive a canoe down the river for like a day and like maybe go camping, and I just simply can't find anyone to do that. And with all the other stuff I've been doing, I'm always doing it alone, because the people that I know don't have the time, or are exhausted, or are busy consuming something on their phone or playing video games. And it becomes a really frustrating reality sometimes, and it's something that to some degree that I'm struggling with. However, I think the key takeaways can really well be that community is really important, that basically having your friends, and also I think like when buying stuff, we earlier talked about like how to spend money and so on. I don't think that money necessarily is bad or all that kind of stuff, but with everyone having lost connection to the value that they're actually producing for society, I think it makes sense to go to local businesses, to go to a local restaurant and talk to the people there. I hope you guys enjoyed this a little bit of a different video. It was maybe in some regards a bit of a rant, but it was something that I kind of had bouncing around in my system for the last few weeks. And yeah, definitely like and subscribe, and see you guys in the next video.